You're going to use this for the base of your coil pot, right? When you do your coil pot, everyone, you're going to need all three pieces the first day when you're starting out, because everyone's base is going to be different. So if this is your base down here, this base is much different than this base, right? So everyone's going to use a protractor. I have these guys over here for a compass, and then we're going to be using these to outline our base for our coil pot. All right, so to do this, we're going to be using the slab roller. Who in here has used the slab roller before? Anybody use the slab roller? Okay, so if you haven't used the slab roller, I think most of you haven't. The way that this thing works is we have rulers on both sides of it. Just make sure that the camera's aimed the right way. There's two rulers on either side right down here. You'll see that the inch is almost halfway up the side of the slab roller. We're going to make sure that our slabs are 1/4 of an inch, okay? So the way that we can change these to 1/4 of an inch is by rotating these up and down. Make sure the little black notch is lined up with the 1/4 of an inch, and then we're going to be feeding the clay in between these two tarps to flatten it out. If you didn't have the clay in between the tarps and you put them between the two rollers in here, you'll notice that this roller is textured. Your clay would stick directly to this, so we want to make sure it's sandwiched in between the two tarps when we put it through. The type of clay that we're using is called buff clay, and it's nice because we're going to be using it directly out of the bag. I know we're used to using the clay from the pug mill, and that's a combination of different clays together, but with the buff clay, since it's all just going to be buff, it really likes to stick well together, and you're going to notice there's going to be less cracks in your coil pots from using this type of clay. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our wire cutter, and we're going to do a nice clean cut off of here. Because the clay's directly out of the bag, it came from a company that has a pug mill that sucks the air out of the clay for you, so you don't really have to wedge this, which is nice. So you'll notice when I cut this, there's not going to be any air bubbles or anything. And when we're cutting it, I'm going to cut down probably about 1/2 of an inch so it can thin it out to that 1/4 of an inch. If it's too thin, it's not going to thin it out for you, and it's not going to be the 1/4 of an inch, obviously. So I'm going to cut this off. It's like a nice piece of clay. You can even partner up. So because Brendan's is a really tiny base, he could probably share his clay with somebody else so that they could roll out their bigger base with the rest of the piece of clay. If there's too many people using the slab roller, we also have rolling pins and dowel rods. So the rolling pin and the dowel rods can be used either at your table or the wedging table by cradling the dowel rods on either side of your piece of clay, and you can roll this on top of the dowel rods to make sure that your clay stays that 1/4 of an inch on top of the rods. Okay, so this is pretty self-explanatory. This one I'm going to show you really quick how to feed the clay through the slab roller. When you feed the clay through the slab roller, we're going to be going down to 1/4 of an inch. This right here is almost a full inch, so I want to try to make sure I pound this out a little bit so I'm not going from too thick to too thin. If it's really thick clay and you try forcing it through the slab roller, you can make the rolling pins kind of come off their tracks and you can break the slab roller. So please make sure you're pounding this out a little bit, either with your palm or a rolling pin, just to make it as close to 1/4 of an inch as possible before you feed it through the slab roller. And take a mental note too, when you put this through the slab roller, it's going to be extruding it long ways. So if you want this to be wider, we're going to put this up against the rolling pin. If you want it to be longer this way and get long that way, then you're going to put it through this way. Okay, so I want this to be more fat, so I'm going to put this through here in between the two tarps. Make sure it's nice and flat, and then we're going to pull this. So I'm going to pull this and then start spinning the gear right here, and then we're going to pull it all the way through. And when we're done, we're going to pull it back. So just flatten this out to a nice even 1/4 of an inch. You see that? So once I have my slab rolled out, what's the next thing I need to do with my slab? Kind of similar to your Christmas tiles. We're going to smooth it out, right? And which tool are we going to use to smooth it? We're going to use a rubber rib, right? So I have my rubber rib here. We're going to smooth out both sides of this base. Make sure you're taking good care of your base, guys. This is the foundation for your project. If your base ends up being too thin, don't just try to like hope for the best and make your pot on top of this. You need to re-roll your base if it's not what you're expecting it to be, if you thinned it out too much, or if you actually put your thumbprints in here or something and you've got it too thin, just restart your base then. Good foundation is going to be essential for your coil pots. So you can see I'm using this side of my rubber rib. I'm going to just kind of start from the top and work my way down. And then when I'm done going vertically, I'm going to start going horizontally to get those lines out of here. Alright, So now that I have my base all rolled out, it's nice and smooth on both sides, I'm going to bring it back to my work area. You guys can just switch over the camera. Put this over here. I have my templates, and I have like the negative space and the positive space of them. In my work area. There we go. Make sure there's no crumbs on your tables, because the crumbs will actually add indentations. Now what we're going to do, is it okay? Cool. So now I see my base from here, okay? So what everyone's gonna do for their base, you're gonna mark. I'm actually gonna use this little piece up here. We're gonna mark the middle section, and we're also gonna mark the ends of it. So we're gonna have 3 little marks. And I'm gonna use this guy, and I'm gonna stick it in the middle, and I'm gonna make sure that I make a nice complete circle around for my base. So it's really tiny. And actually, it might not even work for this. Yeah, this is too tiny. So I'm actually going to freehand this base. It's really small. But if I was, for example, using a bigger base, if this was the base of my coil pot, I'm going to do this one instead. So there's my middle, and then there's my 2 sides. So you're going to stick this in the center, and then very carefully, you're going to keep the center held in, and then rotate this around, just to make your nice outline. And then we're going to go through with the fettling knife and cut the rest. There we go. So with this one, I'm just going to freehand this little base right here. This is a really tiny base. When you're... Can someone grab that for me, please? Just say student speaking, Jeff. What'd they say? Maria, West Main office. Actually, I'm not going to use this base. Is way too tiny. I would say that Brendan, with yours, make it a little bit bigger and then go with the curvature of your pot. Okay. So just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to use the bigger base because mostly everybody's base is going to be a little bit wider. Take your fettling knife and you're going to cut straight down. Make sure you're not cutting at an angle or anything, because then you're going to have an angled base. If you need to trim some off, you can. So now that my base is cut, good. I'm going to take this one off my plastic, and I'm going to use this plastic on top of this board, and I'm going to stick this on top of my king spin wheel, because using a king spin wheel while making your coil pot projects is going to be so much easier, so you can just rotate it as you go. Alright, but before I stick this on here, I need to smooth out the edges of my base. So, can you see my elephant ear sponge? Here it is. So I'm going to take my elephant ear sponge, I'm going to go through and smooth this all out. Making sure that I'm not thinning it out or anything. We're going to keep it at 1/4 of an inch. Keep it nice and circular. I'm going to flip this upside down just to make sure the other side's nice and smooth too. And I don't want any like sharp edges on here, so I'm just smoothing it. Good. Okay. Base is pretty good. Okay. So the tools that you guys need for this project, especially when you're starting out, you definitely need to have your rubber rib. You need to have your elephant ear sponge, and then which tools do you think you need to start putting your coils together? What other tools? A modeling tool is very essential. What else?
Scratch.
The scoring tool, right? So we need a scoring tool, and then we definitely need a modeling tool, right? So I have all my extra pieces of clay. I have my modeling tool. The type of modeling tool that's best to use for this project, everyone, please take a mental note, take a mental picture of this, is this type of modeling tool that's the smaller one, and it has a little curve on the end of it. I don't want to see anybody with the really big modeling tools that we use on the pottery wheels. They're too big for our smaller coil pots. So we have the small modeling tool with a little ridge on it, and then we have our scoring tool, and then there's going to be slip made tomorrow, so everyone can use the slip for slipping and scoring their coils together. All right, so now that we made, pretend this is our base over here, we're doing it the opposite way, and we're gonna cut that like that. So we have our coil pot, the actual positive space. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna look at the negative space of the coil pot, right? So the negative space is going to be used for making all of your coils. So if this is how my coil pot needs to look, so now I know exactly where I need to attach my coils on top of one another. So we see that our coils should go directly on top of our base here. Does everybody see this? And then the next coil is probably going to go on top, and maybe even the third coil is going to go on top. And then I'm going to start angling them inward until this point, and then start angling them out and then back in again. So that's why it's important to keep our base throughout the whole time of our project, so that when we're done, they should look just like our pot when our pot's all finished. Okay, so we're going to keep this in our locker after we're done our base, but then this is going to come out every day to make our coil pots. All right, so my base is good to go. The scraps from rolling out my base can easily be used for rolling out our coils. So whenever you start rolling out a coil, the easiest way to roll out a coil, I wouldn't start rolling this out, right? Because this doesn't even look like a coil just yet. I can't roll this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to compress the clay in my hands. I'm going to make it look like a general coil, and then I'm going to start rolling it out on the table once this looks like almost 1/4 of an inch coil. So I'm compressing the clay. I'm pushing the clay particles even further together. You can see this is a pretty big piece of clay. I don't need all this clay. All right. And the easiest way to roll coils is when you're standing up. So if you're standing up and you're rolling out your coils, you need to have that full range of motion. If you're sitting down and you're just rolling like this, you're only going to roll the bottom half of your coils. So when you're rolling it, you want to make sure you're doing full strokes back and forth to roll out all sides all around that coil. So I'm using all my 8 fingers spread out. I'm not really going to use my thumbs as much. And I'm just kind of feeling out the clay. This is really thick right here, so I'm going to roll this a little bit more. And then I'm going to keep rolling it out, almost extruding the clay outward to thin it out. You can see this part right here is getting kind of flat and it's tall right here. So to fix that, what I can do is I can squish this down to make it more rounded and then continue to roll over top of it. So this is flat. I'm going to stop rolling, push it down, and then roll it out. So I'm making this look really easy. You guys, for the first couple days, you may only make 1 coil for the day and then only attach 1 coil each day. And then once you guys get better at it, you may start ending up like attaching 2 or 3 coils. So just take your time with it. This is probably going to be the longest project that we work on. So I can see this part's thicker right here. I'm going to roll this out a little bit more in the middle. Right here is a little thicker. I'm going to roll this part out. This is a pretty big coil. So I want to make sure that this fits directly on top of my base. And what I can do is I'm going to overlap it a little bit so that when I cut this, I know that it's going to fit snug together. So I'm going to make sure it's directly on top all the way around. Not one side is like leaning over or anything. Now I'm going to take my fettling knife and I'm going to cut it at an angle. So when I cut this at an angle between both coils, you can see that excess coil comes off. And now look how nice and snug this fits together. It's like a perfect fit, right? Because I cut them both at an angle because they overlapped each other. All right. All right, so now that I know this fits directly on top, it's matching my template right now, just like that. Now I'm going to take my coil off and I'm going to slip and score. So I have my coil very gently like that. I'm going to score up the top of my base. Notice how much I'm scoring this up. The more scratched up, the more it looks like Velcro, the more it's going to stick. There we go. I'm going to scratch this part up. And then when I add the slip, I'm just going to add the slip to the base of it. I only have to add slip to one side because it just activates it. Slip. When you're making your coils, everyone, you need to attach your coil the same day. So I would see some students last year, they would try to make like 5 coils in one day, and then they thought that the next day they could attach them all. Why do you think that's a problem if you're making 5 coils one day and then attaching them the next? What would happen? They're gonna dry out. Even if they dry out just a little bit, if you have a coil that's like just a little bit dried, this is even dried out from last period. When I go to bend this, you can see it's like cracking on me already. If this dried out for maybe another hour, it would probably just snap right in half like a twig. So it's important that as soon as you're done making your coils, you're gonna slip and score, attach them on top of your project. When you're attaching them to your project too, you're adding moisture into your base, because when your coil pots start getting a little bit taller, you're going to notice the base of it's drying out a little bit more than the top of your project, which is okay because it's slowly drying and it's slowly getting to where it needs to be. But you need to attach those coils to keep